On my 57th birthday, I watched a men's Rolex I'd once given my little brother roll across a church hall floor and hit the wood with a sharp clink. My wife's face went white, my brother's went red, and everyone in our small corner of Cedar Rapids finally saw the kind of family we really were. It didn't start in that church hall, though. It started with the sound of the mail truck coughing to a stop outside my house the morning after a birthday I spent alone. My name is Henry Whitaker. I've lived in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, my whole life. Folks here know me as the guy in the faded John Deere jacket who keeps the Quaker Oats warehouse from falling apart. I've been married to my wife, Susan, for 31 years. And until a few weeks ago, I would have told you my younger brother Daniel was the person I trusted most in this world. The night everything really started, snow was tapping against the kitchen window in soft, uneven rhythms. It was November 28th, my birthday. 57. Not a milestone like 50 or 60, just one of those in-between years nobody makes a big fuss about. Susan stood in our narrow hallway with her suitcase by her side already zipped. "Henry, I swear if I could get out of this trip I would," she said, slipping her arms into her long gray coat. "They scheduled this training last minute. Minneapolis. Insurance audit stuff. You know how it is." I was leaning against the counter watching chili bubble in the crock pot. The smell filled the whole house, tomatoes, ground beef, chili powder. "On my birthday, though?" I asked. I tried to keep my voice light like it was a joke. "You couldn't tell them your husband's turning into an old man and needs supervision." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll make it up to you, I promise. We'll go to Olive Garden next week. I'll even let you order 2 baskets of breadsticks." That was already the plan, I said. The breadsticks are the only reason I stay married. She laughed, gave me a quick kiss that tasted like coffee and peppermint gum, and wheeled her suitcase toward the door. "I'll call you when I get there," she said. "Maybe we'll do a little video chat later, okay?" "Sure," I said. "Drive careful." I watched her taillights disappear down our quiet street, red dots swallowed by the early darkness. The house felt bigger and emptier the second the door clicked shut. I turned back to the crock pot, stirred the chili, and told myself not to be dramatic. People travel for work. Husbands eat birthday dinner alone all the time. Right. Still, I set 2 bowls out of habit. Then I put 1 back feeling foolish. The rest of the night was quiet. I ate in front of the TV, some old crime show rerun humming in the background. Snow kept slapping against the window. Susan texted around 8:30. "Made it. Hotel's fine. Long day. Talk tomorrow. Love you." I stared at the little heart emoji, then typed back, "Love you too. Get some sleep." I went to bed feeling a little sorry for myself, but not suspicious. I'm not a naturally suspicious man. That's part of how I ended up in this mess. The next morning started like any other cold Iowa morning. My knees complained when I swung my legs out of bed. The house creaked in all its usual places. I made coffee that came out a little too strong and stood at the kitchen sink watching the snowplow crawl past our driveway. That's when I heard it, the familiar cough and rattle of the USPS truck pulling up outside. Our mail carrier Jim has been on this route longer than I've been at the warehouse. I heard the sliding door bang open, the heavy boots on our front steps, and then the solid thump of something a little bigger than regular mail hitting the porch. I opened the door and a cloud of cold air slapped me in the face. A padded envelope the size of a shoebox sat on the welcome mat, dusted with snow. The return label read, "Riverstone Hotel, Forgotten Items, Cedar Rapids, Iowa." My first thought was honest confusion. I hadn't stayed in a hotel. Susan was supposed to be up in Minneapolis. I bent down, knees aching, and picked it up. The shipping label was printed neat and clear. "To Susan Whitaker, address ours." Inside, something heavy shifted against the cardboard. I carried it to the kitchen table, brushed the snow off with my sleeve, and slit the tape with a butter knife. There was a folded piece of paper on top. Guest property checklist. Room King 703, date 11/28. My birthday. My eyes traced down the list. 1. Women's blazer gray. 1. Toiletry bag black. 1. Men's Rolex Submariner engraved. My heart gave a slow, off-beat thump. I reached into the padded envelope and pulled out a small black velvet box. It was the kind of box you see in jewelry commercials. My fingers didn't feel steady when I flipped it open. The watch sat in there, heavy and familiar, the stainless steel band catching the weak morning light coming through the blinds. It looked exactly the way it had the day I bought it, simple, clean, expensive enough that my hands had shaken when I handed over my debit card. I turned it over and there it was, the engraving. To Danny, you've earned it. Love, Henry. You know that feeling when a memory hits you so hard it's like getting shoved backward in time. 1 second I was standing in my quiet kitchen in my worn-out slippers, and the next I was back at Daniel's 40th birthday party. He'd walked into Mom's old house late as usual, smelling like cheap cologne and hope. Everyone else had already eaten. I'd saved him a plate. I pulled the little velvet box from my pocket and handed it to him, right there in front of Mom and my kids. Open it, I'd said, grinning like an idiot. He'd lifted the lid, seen the Rolex, and for a second, my little brother, the one I'd taught to ride a bike, the one I'd covered for when he dented Dad's truck, looked like a kid again. His face lit up with something between disbelief and pride. Henry, he'd said, voice cracking just a little. You didn't have to. I'd cut in. You've been working hard, you stuck it out. You've earned it, Danny. We'd hugged. Mom had wiped at her eyes with a napkin. Standing there in my kitchen all those years later, holding that same watch, my stomach dropped. The room felt wrong, like the angles had shifted. I snapped the box shut, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't look at it anymore. My hands were sweating even though the house was cold. For a long minute I just stood there, the padded envelope, the checklist, and that velvet box spread out on the table in front of me. Susan's suitcase had been packed for Minneapolis. The hotel return address was 20 minutes from our house. The date on the form was November 28th, my birthday. Something in my chest went very, very still. I walked out to the garage, the concrete floor warming slowly under a faint strip of winter sun coming through the little high window. The smell of oil metal and old sawdust wrapped around me like a familiar blanket. This was my space, my workbench, my tools, my pegboard with outlines of wrenches and hammers drawn in black marker. I opened the top drawer of my old red toolbox, pushed aside a tape measure and a bag of screws, and set the velvet box in the corner. I closed the drawer gently like I was putting a baby to bed. Back when I taught Daniel to drive our dad's rusty Ford on a county road, he'd gripped the wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. Relax, I told him, laughing. I'm right here. I won't let anything happen to you. If you'd told me then that one day I'd be hiding his watch in my toolbox because I was afraid of what it meant, I would have thought you were crazy. When Susan came home the next evening, the house smelled like chili again. I'd made a fresh batch because cooking calms me down. The scent of tomatoes and cumin floated through the kitchen the second she walked through the door, shaking snow off her coat. Smells amazing, she said, dropping her purse on the counter like nothing in the world was wrong. Minneapolis was brutal. The roads were icy the whole way back. I stood at the stove, stirring slowly. My mind replayed the checklist. The engraving, room 703, my birthday. You didn't call last night, I said quietly. She froze just a second, just long enough that I noticed, then opened a cabinet like she hadn't. Oh, Henry, I know. I got to the hotel so late I practically fell asleep walking. Then the morning was meetings. Meetings. She kissed my cheek, warm and quick. I promise I'll make your birthday up to you. That word promise felt like sandpaper across my chest. I set 2 bowls on the table, even though I wasn't hungry. Susan sat across from me talking about invoices, coworkers, hotel breakfasts, everything except the truth. I watched her spoon chili steam, rising, her expression relaxed, normal, familiar. And all I could think was she wasn't in Minneapolis. She was 20 minutes from here, with my brother. But I didn't confront her. I didn't even ask a question. Anger makes a man loud. But I needed to be cold. The second I raised my voice, I'd lose the war before it even started. After dinner, she took her purse and went to shower. When I heard the water running, I slipped into the garage and checked the drawer, making sure the Rolex was still there. I touched the velvet box once with my fingertips, just once, then shut the drawer like sealing a tomb. The next morning, I drove straight to the Riverstone Hotel. The lobby was warm, carpeted in deep green, a faint smell of citrus cleaner lingering in the air. I walked up to the reception desk and smiled politely at the young woman behind the counter. Morning, I said. I think my wife stayed here the other night and may have lost something. Name's Susan Whitaker, room 703. The receptionist typed for a moment, nodded. Yes, she checked out yesterday. What item are you missing? I hesitated. I'm not sure, that's why I'm asking. She clicked her tongue softly. Let me check the notes. Her eyes scanned the screen. Looks like... She checked in alone, but there's mention of a second guest joining later. My stomach lurched. A second guessed I kept my voice flat calm. Yes, sir. And they ordered champagne and a breakfast for two package the next morning. My jaw tightened until it hurt. I don't suppose you keep camera footage, I asked. We do, she said apologetically, but it's overwritten every 72 hours. I'm sorry. No footage. No easy proof. But the words a second guest echoed through my head like a church bell. I thanked her, walked out into the cold, and stood in the parking lot a long time, watching my own breath fog in the air. The next stop was Cedar Rapids Community Credit Union. I knew Susan wouldn't question me checking our joint account. They send me alerts all the time. The teller there, a young man with blonde hair sticking up like he'd fought a leaf blower, printed the statements I requested. Holiday shopping, he asked casually as he handed me the papers. Something like that, I said. I sat in my truck and read them line by line. There they were. Riverstone Hotel, room charge 2, guest Riverstone Spa, couples foot soak, room service, champagne, plus breakfast for 2. I closed my eyes, let my forehead fall against the steering wheel, and breathed through the sting. I didn't drive home. Not yet. I drove to the only place I knew I could sit without falling apart, VFW Post 788. The moment I opened the door, the smell of stale coffee and cigarette smoke hit me like a memory. The TV was playing the noon news. A couple of old-timers were arguing about Packers versus Bears. The whole place sounded like comfort. Earl, a Vietnam vet who'd taken a liking to me years ago, was nursing his usual black coffee. You look like hell, he said bluntly when I sat next to him. Feel like it too? He waited. Earl never pushed. Eventually I told him not everything, not yet, but enough. Someone close, I said quietly. Someone I trusted. He nodded, eyes steady. Family. I stared into my coffee. Yeah. Earl leaned back, rubbed a hand across his chin. Son, betrayal inside the family ain't something you swing your fists at. You swing at blood, you lose twice. You gotta outsmart 'em, never outshout 'em. Those words settled deep inside me like wet cement. I drove home with a simple rule carved into my bones: stay quiet, stay cold, stay smart. Susan was humming in the kitchen when I walked in, stirring another pot of chili like nothing in the world had changed. The smell hit me first, warm, cozy, comforting, but it didn't comfort me anymore. Now it smelled like a cover story. That night I slept lightly, every sound in the house sharp, the furnace clicking on the fridge, humming, Susan shifting in bed beside me. I stared at the ceiling and told myself over and over, you're not ready to confront. Not yet. You need more than anger. You need proof. My chance came sooner than I thought. The next morning, Susan said, I'm working late again. Audit season. She kissed my cheek, grabbed her coffee, and rushed out the door. As her car pulled away, I exhaled a long breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I grabbed my coat. I had work to do. I didn't go back to the warehouse that morning. I called in, said my back was acting up again, which wasn't even a lie. Stress has a way of twisting a man's spine until it feels like barbed wire. Instead, I sat in the truck with the heater clicking and groaning, staring at the printed bank statements on the passenger seat. Room charges, champagne, breakfast for 2, and the Rolex, sitting in my toolbox like a trapped animal. I needed more. Not more rage, God knows I had enough of that, but more proof. Something even Susan and Daniel couldn't talk their way around. So I did what any confused, betrayed 57-year-old man does when he doesn't understand something. He Googled. I typed in the Rolex serial number exactly the way the jeweler had told me to register it years ago. The search brought me to a jewelry insurance database. I nearly clicked away, assuming I'd hit the wrong link. But there it was. Policyholder Daniel Whitaker item, Rolex Submariner, stainless insurance contact, Susan Whitaker, relationship spouse equivalent. I stared at those 2 words so long they started to blur. Spouse equivalent. My breath went sharp and shallow, like someone punched me just under the ribs. They weren't just sneaking around. They were planning a life where I wasn't in the picture. I whispered it out loud just to hear how it sounded in the air, spouse equivalent. Jesus, Danny. Susan. What the hell are you two doing? My hands shook, and not from the cold. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. I wasn't thinking straight. I wasn't breathing straight. I wasn't anything straight. I needed to print that appraisal, right away. The Cedar Rapids Public Library was warm, the kind of warm that hits you like a blanket when you walk through the sliding doors. The printers were tucked in the back behind rows of audiobooks and large print mysteries. I logged into a public computer, hand still trembling a little, and opened the appraisal. I clicked print. The machine whirred to life, spitting out the pages: room charges, insurance appraisal, and that gut punch phrase, spouse equivalent. I gathered the warm sheets and turned and froze. Susan was walking through the library entrance. Her coat dusted with snow, her hair pulled back, papers in her hand. She walked straight toward the copy machine not 10 feet from me. Panic hit hard and hot. I shoved the papers against my stomach, zipped my coat halfway, and angled my body away like I was reading the community bulletin board. She didn't see me. She fed papers into the copier, humming softly, completely unaware that I was standing close enough to smell the faint scent of her peppermint gum. When she finished, she picked up her copies, tapped the stack straight on the counter, and walked off toward the front desk. Only when she was gone did I breathe again. I leaned against the bookshelf, heart pounding like a hammer in drywall. That was too close, way too close. I left the library and went straight home, the printed evidence tucked inside my coat like contraband. When I reached the garage, I shut the door behind me, switched on the dim overhead bulb, and laid everything on the workbench. Receipts, room charges, insurance papers, and the Rolex. I opened the toolbox drawer, pulled out the velvet box, and set it beside the papers. The garage smelled like old oil sawdust and cold metal. My sanctuary. I needed a plan. One that wasn't messy. One that didn't involve yelling or breaking things or getting hauled off by the police like some hot-headed teenager. I'm too old for fistfights and too tired for drama. Then, like someone flicked on a light switch, it came to me. The St. Matthew's Christmas charity auction. It happens every December. Families, church folks, neighbors, all squeezed into the church hall, drinking bad coffee and bidding on baskets of canned goods and crocheted blankets. Susan and Daniel volunteered every year. They loved the spotlight, the attention, the smiles from strangers. And this year they'd signed up again. A public space, a community gathering, a microphone. I pictured them standing side by side, handing out raffle tickets, laughing like two people who didn't have a single secret in the world. The thought made my jaw tighten. I went to the church that same afternoon. Bells were ringing faintly somewhere inside as I pushed through the heavy doors. A couple of volunteers were taping decorations to the walls, paper snowflakes, red and green banners. The air smelled like sugar cookies and floor polish. Need any extra hands? I asked the woman in charge, a cheerful lady named Margaret. Oh, Henry, we'd be thrilled to have you. She pulled out a clipboard. Let's see. We still need someone to manage the sound system, microphones, music cues, announcements. Interested? Interested wasn't the right word. I felt something settle inside me, quiet, cold purpose. Yeah, I said, I can do that. After I left the church, I didn't go home immediately. I sat in the truck with the heater blasting, watching snow fall in heavy flakes. I thought about the first time Daniel drove Dad's old Ford. He'd been 16, terrified, gripping the wheel like it could run away from him. Relax, I had told him. I won't let anything happen to you. I'd believed that back then. I truly believed it. But people change. Or maybe they don't. Maybe they just get better at hiding the parts of themselves you don't want to see. When I pulled into our driveway, I already knew exactly how this was going to go. I would gather the proof. I would take the stage. I would tell the truth. And I would do it once clean and clear in front of the whole community. Not to destroy them, but to free myself. And somewhere deep inside, under the anger and shock and betrayal, a different feeling flickered to life. Something sharp, steady, and strangely calm. Resolve. The night of the St. Matthew's Christmas charity auction arrived colder than usual. The kind of cold that sinks straight into your bones no matter how many layers you're wearing. I parked in the church lot beneath a buzzing street lamp and sat for a moment with the engine running, letting the heater push back the chill. Inside the glove box was the padded USPS envelope. Inside the envelope was the Rolex, and inside me was a knot I knew wouldn't loosen until the night was over. I killed the engine, stepped out into the snow, and took a long breath that stung my lungs. Inside the church hall, the air was warm and thick with the scent of sugar cookies, burnt coffee, and winter coats drying near the radiators. Kids darted between tables, paper snowflakes dangled from the ceiling, and Christmas lights flickered along the walls. Volunteers moved about with trays of brownies and baskets for silent auction items. I walked toward the small sound booth, really just a folding table with a mixer board, 2 speakers, and a microphone. Margaret waved at me from across the room. Henry, you made it, thank goodness. The music playlist is here, and the wireless mic has been a little fussy. Just give it a tap if it cuts out. No problem, I said, keeping my voice steady. Susan was across the room near the raffle table, laughing with a couple of women from church. Daniel, my brother, stood beside her, smiling, shaking hands, chatting like he didn't have a care in the world. He wore the same leather jacket I helped him buy years ago when he got a job at a car dealership. He hadn't kept the job long, but he kept the jacket. They looked comfortable together. It twisted something deep inside me. But I reminded myself, stay cold, stay steady, stay smart. The event began. Christmas music played softly. People mingled. Kids tugged at their parents' sleeves asking for cookies. I kept one eye on the soundboard, one eye on Susan and Daniel. As the night went on, the hall grew louder. Laughter, chatter, chair legs scraping the wooden floor. But inside me, everything grew quieter, more focused, like a camera lens tightening. When the raffle portion was about to start, I saw my moment. Susan and Daniel took their places at the front. A small crowd gathered, neighbors, church members, co-workers. I stepped away from the sound booth and approached Pastor Reynolds, who was off to the side, balancing a cup of coffee on a stack of programs. Pastor, I said quietly, can I talk to you? Just for a second. He nodded and stepped aside with me. I need you to look at something, I said, pulling the appraisal papers halfway out of my coat. It's important, very important. His brows drew together. Henry, this isn't really the place. It's about my wife and my brother. His mouth pressed into a thin line. He glanced toward the crowd, then back at me. Henry, I'm truly sorry if something is happening in your family, but I cannot intervene in personal disputes tonight. My breath frosted in the air between us. I just need someone to witness. I can pray for you, he interrupted gently, but that's all. And just like that, he stepped away. A strange hollow feeling opened inside my chest. Not anger, not despair, but aloneness. For the first time, it hit me, this confrontation, this moment, this entire mess was mine to carry. No reinforcements, no mediator, just me. The music faded out as the raffle was set to begin. The hall grew quieter, the kind of quiet where even whispers seemed too loud. I walked to the sound booth, picked up the microphone, and tapped it twice. Speakers hummed, heads turned, conversation stopped. Susan looked up, confusion crossing her face. Daniel stiffened. I stepped toward the center of the room. Evening, everyone. I began, my voice steady in the speakers. Sorry to interrupt before the raffle, but there's something I need to say. Something that involves 2 people in this room. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Susan forced a smile. Henry, sweetie, maybe we should, I held up the padded USPS envelope. This arrived on my doorstep the morning after my birthday. A hush fell over the hall. I walked up to Susan and handed it to her. Go ahead, I said. Open it. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached inside and pulled out the velvet box. She opened it, and the instant she saw the watch, her face drained of color. The Rolex slipped from her fingers and hit the wooden floor with a sharp echoing. Clink. Gasps scattered through the crowd. Someone near the cookie table whispered, "Oh my Lord." I bent down, picked up the watch, and turned it so the engraving faced the crowd. To Danny, you've earned it. Love, Henry. A ripple of recognition went through the room. I lifted the microphone again. Riverstone Hotel, I said, voice low. King Room 703, November 28th, my birthday. I took out the printed bank statements. Room charges for 2 guests. Champagne. Breakfast for 2. Silence thickened. Susan covered her mouth. Daniel stared at the floor. Then I held up the insurance appraisal. And this, I said, is the insurance policy for this watch. Owner Daniel Whitaker. Emergency contact Susan Whitaker. Relationship. Spouse equivalent. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. An older man near the coffee urn muttered loudly, "Well, that's one way to unwrap a family secret before the presents." A few people snorted in shock, others shook their heads, and the church hall felt suddenly too small to hold everything spilling out. Daniel stepped forward, eyes pleading. "Henry, listen, let's go outside and talk. Just you and me, okay, please?" I looked at him for a long moment. My brother, the boy I taught to drive Dad's rusty Ford, the man I thought would always stand beside me. "No, Danny," I said, voice steady. "I gave you this watch in front of the whole family, and now I'm giving it back in front of the whole community. I pressed the Rolex into his palm and closed his fingers around it. "It's yours," I said. "So is everything you chose to do with it." Then I turned, walked through the stunned silence, and didn't look back. I don't remember the drive home that night. I remember the cold. I remember the way my breath fogged the windshield because I'd forgotten to turn on the defroster. And I remember the strange quiet inside my chest, like someone had finally stopped banging on the walls in there. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as always. Same sagging gutters, same porch light with the burned-out bulb Susan kept forgetting to replace. But stepping inside felt different, like I'd walked into a museum exhibit of a life that wasn't mine anymore. Susan came home 2 days later to pack a bag. She didn't slam doors or scream or beg. She moved like a shadow through the living room, folding sweaters, zipping luggage, avoiding my eyes. At one point she murmured, "Henry the Rubber, I never meant..." I held up my hand. "Please don't finish that sentence. There's no good ending to it." And she didn't try again. After she left, Daniel called. Once, then twice, then 5 times. I didn't pick up. I deleted every voicemail without listening. Whatever he had to say, it wasn't worth the breath it took to say it. But the aftermath wasn't clean. Nobody tells you that. Nobody tells you that the day after exposing a betrayal feels less like victory and more like stepping into a cold, empty room where you can hear your own heartbeat too clearly. Divorce papers came next. Susan's lawyer tried to open with excuses, but the evidence I had made everything simple, clean, quiet, almost sad in how quickly it went through. I buried myself in work at the warehouse. Early mornings, late nights. I fixed machines that didn't need fixing. Reorganized supply racks that were already neat. I guess part of me just needed to keep my hands busy so my mind didn't chew me alive. Evenings were harder. The house made sounds I'd never noticed before: pipes settling the refrigerator, clicking on the wind, slipping under the eaves. After 31 years of hearing Susan humming while she folded laundry or chopping vegetables on the kitchen counter, silence felt heavier than noise ever did. One night I wandered out to the garage. The air was cold enough that my breath hung like smoke. I flipped on the old bulb overhead and leaned against the workbench, letting the familiar smell of engine oil and sawdust wrap around me. While clearing a corner of the bench, something slipped out from behind a stack of cardboard, an old shoebox full of family photos I hadn't looked at in years. I sat on the stool, opened the lid, and pulled out the first picture. It was the 3 of us, me, Susan, and Daniel, standing in my mother's backyard. Sunlight smiles, arms around each other like we were welded together. I stared at that photo for a long time, waiting for the punch of grief to hit me. But it didn't, not the way I expected. What I felt was release, a soft ache but clean, like finally pulling out a splinter that's been stuck too deep for too long. "That picture belongs to a life that's gone," I said quietly. And I dropped it into the recycling bin beside the workbench. Not with anger, with finality. Closing that chapter made the silence in the garage feel a little less heavy. A week later, my daughter and son came over. I figured they wanted to check on the old man, make sure I hadn't taken to living on TV dinners and lawnmower fumes. We sat around the kitchen table with mugs of coffee, steam curling into the air. My son slid a small blue box across the table. "Go on, Dad," he said gently. "Open it." Inside was a watch. Not a Rolex, nothing extravagant. A simple stainless steel timepiece, clean lines, classic face. On the back, engraved in tidy lettering, "To Dad, stronger than ever." My throat closed up. I cleared it, tried again to find words, failed again. My daughter reached over and squeezed my hand. "You didn't scream. You didn't break things. You didn't make a scene. You just showed them the mirror." She smiled softly. Not many people could do that. I looked down at the watch again. Light caught the silver just right, and something inside me loosened. Not all the way, but enough. I slipped it onto my wrist. It fit perfectly. Over the next few weeks, I settled into a new kind of quiet. Not the cold, painful kind, the peaceful kind. I fixed up the garage, cleaned out old drawers, cooked chili because I wanted to, not because I needed to fill space. And slowly, quietly, the weight in my chest eased. People talk about revenge like it's fire and fury, like it's smashing plates or yelling until your throat tears. But the truth is different. Sometimes revenge is nothing more than refusing to carry someone else's lies anymore. Sometimes it's putting a watch in a man's hand and letting him sit with what he's done. Sometimes it's walking away with your dignity when others threw theirs in the dirt. And sometimes revenge is simply giving yourself permission to start over. If this story helps even one person out there, someone who thinks they're too old, too tired, too stuck to begin again, then telling it was worth it. And if you want to hear more stories from old guys like me, learning how to save ourselves well, you're welcome to stick around.